So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our fourth edition of the Bedrocan Series. Today we have a very special guest with Perry Davidson. I'll introduce him a little later. First of all, some house rules. If you have questions during the webinar for Perry or for me or for anyone else, please use the Q&A button in the bottom, and I will see if I can put in your question during the webinar, or else we'll look at the end which questions are still left. To start with, we always try to get a feeling of who is our audience. So we'd like to start off with a short poll, if we can bring it up, to see what is your knowledge about medicinal cannabis at this moment, and what is your background? So we have an idea of who our audience is. And let's see, there it comes, the two questions. We put the two questions in one for this session. So, are you an absolute expert, or are you new to the subject? And what is your background? If you could, and if you don't want to answer, that's fine as well. It just gives us an idea of who our audience is. I can't vote because I'm a panelist. Let's see if we can get some results. There we go. Wow. We have 10 absolute experts. So Perry, if you could, you're welcome to join us. There's no one new to medicinal cannabis. We have some healthcare professionals, researchers, business. Actually, if my spread over the audience, Perry, there's a burden on our shoulders. We have the largest group is absolute experts in the topic of medicinal cannabis. So I hope
great company to be in.
That's a great company. We talked before, and maybe I would put expert if I would have the poll. And yesterday I learned so much new when you told me your story. I knew about Syqe, but you told me so much new. So Perry, I hope to learn a lot from you today. Welcome to our webinar. You're actually our first international guest. Our first three guests were researchers. They were all from the Netherlands. You're the first foreigner from a Dutch perspective. So very welcome. It's a first timer for us. And today we're going to talk about the unique metered dose inhaler that you developed over the last years. And you created it. You're the CEO of Syqe Medical, who's developing the inhaler. So maybe can you share with us, what is your background? Where do you come from, and how did you start Syqe?
Yeah, so thanks all. It's a privilege to be hosted by the Bedrocan group, which I have tremendous appreciation for along the years. And so this is a great opportunity. So yeah, Syqe has been around for about 10 years, and it's not just me, it's about 100 people working on it, dedicated R&D, manufacturing, regulation, so many different teams. I can not number them right now, which have been working on this for so long. And my personal background, I was dealing in the cannabis space since 2005. And I recognize a lot of the challenges of trying to increase the accessibility of this very important drug to patients in need. And I saw a lot of the barriers that would prevent this from really reaching the true patients, as I would refer to them. And I'd look for what would be the most impactful thing I can do to open the floodgates for this to be available to as many patients as possible. So I recognize that establishing a scientific foundation on the actual dosing system, and particularly in the inhalation space, which is the majority of patients are benefiting from it, and we'll talk about it briefly maybe later. If we can nail down the dosing problem in the inhalation space of cannabis, that would potentially open up the floodgates for as many patients as possible to access this important drug.
Yeah, because
that's in a nutshell.
Yeah, because you're absolutely correct. For instance, in the Netherlands, since 2003, patients can have access to standardized medicinal cannabis, but unlike any other normal drug, we leave a lot of the usage of the dosage. We leave it to the patients, which actually makes it very hard to use and hard to dose. So how come in all those years, and of course you're working very hard on it, but how come, for instance, in those 20 years almost, it never developed into a normal drug that you can use like any other people that people are used to using drugs?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And I've been struggling with that question for a long time. I'm trying to come up with analogies. So if you look at the opiate space, for example, so 200 years ago, opiate was pretty much the first pharmaceutical that was became like a blockbuster. So they had a lot of issues with dosing of opiates. And if you had a high dose of opiates, you could die from it. And if you have a low dose, nothing really happens. So they really struggled with the dosing. And once they were able to nail it down and just put out the morphine molecule and starting to measure it, it became more usable. Now, fortunately for everyone, cannabis does not have any of those lethal side effects that the opiate has, but it does have other adverse events that impact quality of life. Now, one man's adverse event could be another man's pleasure, but if you look at chronic patients that want to have a sustainable quality of life, and the psychoactive effect, if we just choose one, and cannabis has several sedative effects, which might be unwanted, but psychoactivity on a chronic usage, that is not conducive to a good quality of life. So people were afraid of taking a dose which would be too high, and that would take them into that adverse effect realms. And a too low dose would be ineffective. So the needle really had to teeter back and forth. Now, the problem was that oral intake of cannabis has not shown a lot of effect compared to inhalation. And again, it's a very, I would say, arguably a significant topic, but a lot of the products that try to give it orally have not shown the same level of efficacy, given the actual absorption rate, etc. I'm like happy we have experts here on the attendees. So when you go through your first pass, THC changes to 11-hydroxy. It's a different molecule, gets more of a sedative effect. So about 80% use it via inhalation. And inhalation is a very erratic type of thing. And you rightfully said, Ole, that when a doctor prescribes cannabis to a patient, even if he was able to provide him with an atomically identical, if it was a cannabis cigarette or an atomically identical pod in a vaporizer, even if that was possible, just the inhalation dynamics, just the pattern of the inhalation would change the dose so dramatically that it is still a wild west in terms of understanding where the dose. So once there's no ground to lock onto, the medical community is finding it very hard to find a standard and then proliferate that and have the whole medical community educated on that and starting having a basis for mainstream cannabis treatment.
Yeah. So, and that is why you started you invented the Syqe inhaler to overcome these problems. So both for the doctor and the patient to have these very precise dosage in inhalation. That's correct, right?
Right.
And can you tell something about the process? How did you, and the trials you did, and how did you get the data on this, on the inhaler?
Yeah, so I'll try to squeeze 10 years in 1 minute. When you go out to buy a car, you look at specific metrics, speed, fuel efficiency, etc. When you go out to decide what is a meter dose delivery system, you look at blood levels. You look at how much THC is in the blood after the dosing took place. That's where we start. We said we want you to be a very precise delivery system. That means that every time we provide you with the dose, we can expect to see the right amount of THC in your blood. If that's the one you're measuring. So we knew we had to be very precise in the blood. And in order to do that, we had to be very precise in the aerosol that goes into your body. We had to be very precise in the aerosol that was leaving the inhaler. It's two separate things. You can have a meter dose, but it's not actually ending up in your lungs. So you had a system that guarantees it ends up in your lungs. We had to be very precise in the loading of the cartridges, which has the cannabis inside. And we had to be very precise in the manufacturing process. And lastly, and as importantly, connecting to Bedrocan, we had to be very precise with our starting materials. The actual cannabis that we use at the beginning would impact eventually the levels in the blood of the patient and consequently impact the effect, the clinical effect. So if we didn't have a standardized product at one end, such as Bedrocan, our patient not know if they're going to be high from this or an effector from that. That's pretty much the importance of the precision throughout this very long path that took us many years to rein in and make sure it works in that way and being consistent.
So the standardization of the starting material is very important. Can you use any kind of cannabis?
Unfortunately not. Again, if the fluctuations in the starting materials are very big, we have a certain level of standardization that we're able to apply during our manufacturing process. But if the fluctuations are too big, and again, in Syqe, we decided to keep the whole plant spectrum in our aerosol. We measure THC as a marker, but we actually deliver the entire spectrum. So if there are very significant fluctuations in the starting material, it's going to be very hard for us to nail it down. So we cannot just use any cannabis from the street. Of course, it has to be consistent. It has to be very specific in its chromatogram, its actual cannabinoid and terpene profile. And we have to be certain that every time we get a new batch from our supplier, it meets those specs in order for us to guarantee to the physician and the patient that they would be getting the same clinical outcome. That's how important it is.
Yeah, and we because on the clinical outcome, you did a lot of research, of course.
Right.
Can you share us a little? Can you share with us a little bit about what did you research and what was the outcome of your trials?
Yeah, so you're saying it was good. I could show a few slides, so maybe it's a good opportunity. All if we could show you just the 1 or 2 slides that I think distill the actual study that we did there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm going to jump right into it. So yeah, after we developed the actual technology, we were able for the first time to start looking for what is the dose, what is the right dose for cannabis inhalation. And I think it's important for everyone to know that percentage of THC is not really helpful in knowing what is a dose. The dose usually is measured in absolute terms of the active ingredients, measured either in milligrams, or in our case, to our surprise, measured in micrograms. So I'm going to be very high level here, but what you see here is again a blood level of THC between patients. Each line is a patient, and they took the exact same product. They were instructed to take it in the same way, and there was a very wide variance between the patients. One was very low, and he took the same amount, and one took the same product but reached a very high level of THC in their blood, and it's significantly different. Now we ask ourselves, what is the optimum therapeutic window? Where should the actual dose be for the cannabis patient? In opiates, you have a dosing regimen, a dosing range that physicians know how to prescribe before it kills you or before it's not effective. And what was that range in the cannabis space? And we didn't know it. It could be anywhere across this very wide range of levels in the blood that we had to tackle. So our clinical studies were only possible after we were able to first narrow down our precision, meaning that our device was able to hit a very narrow window. So every time we gave a dose, it was only fluctuating between those blue lines rather between those red lines that any other product had. So once we had that, we were able to go into clinical trials and try to find what would be the dose. So here, I try to keep it high level. I hope it's understandable. I'll try to make it quick. What you see here is a summary of our third study. It was a double-blind, placebo-controlled crossover study, published. You can get access to it. It's freely available access it's in the European Journal of Pain. And what you can see here on the bottom part is the actual blood levels of THC. Again, that's the metrics, that's the mechanical metrics of dose precision. It's how much THC is in the blood. Mm-hmm. On the top left, you see how much pain relief the patient experienced. If he came in with a pain number 8, if we show number 2, it means it went down to 6. So it's 2 from the baseline. And on the right side, we chose one adverse event. And again, cannabis has a few of them, which is the drug high. Patients would like to be functioning through their daily lives and not be high all day. Maybe there are some times they would be preferring to be high, but definitely not every time of day. And so that's an adverse event. So we originally gave those patients a placebo, 0 micrograms of THC. Again, it's with the full plant spectrum in the actual dose. And of course, there was nothing in the blood levels, but these patients did report what is known as a placebo effect. They reported that their pain went down 1 point. Now, before we go any further, just to make it clear that cannabis is shown in all its clinical meta-analysis studies that cannabis takes pain at a ceiling effect of about 2. So cannabis takes pain on all the studies that have shown about 2 points below your existing pain level. Now that placebo showed 1 reduction of pain, which is expected, but also made people think they were high 1 out of 10. So if no one in our attendees were ever used cannabis, imagine you're intoxicated from alcohol 1 out of 10. So that was from the placebo. Well, then we gave them 500 micrograms, and we got a very specific level in the blood, which was expected given the precision of our technology. And then we were able to reach the known level of pain reduction from cannabis using 500 micrograms as a single dose. And that was very good to see. And psychoactivity reports from that 500 micrograms were quite marginally low, about 2.5, again, not too far from the placebo. What was interesting, what happened once we gave these patients 1,000 micrograms, and look how interestingly, 500 gun is about 14 nanograms per ml, and we just doubled the dose, and we saw pretty much exactly double in the bloodstream, again, to show how precise the system is. And we got a slightly better effect in pain relief, but what was really interesting, psychoactivity went double. We went to about 5 out of 10. 5 out of 10, and I'll wrap this up in a minute, means that the patient is in a way debilitated. Okay, definitely a patient who experienced cannabis before, if he's high 5 out of 10. So we did this, I would say, layman's experience of trying to find what is the therapeutic window. And we were surprised to learn that it's somewhere in the range of 500 micrograms of THC per treatment session. It is a one-time inhalation of 500 micrograms. And here, although it really became interesting, is that when we compared that to what graph we saw before of the existing inhalation products that people use, if we said, well, okay, so where is that therapeutic window that we found? Where does it rely compared to what people are using today? You can see, to our surprise, how low and how narrow it was that we found that this therapeutic window is actually the one that yielded the best results. This is what gave our patients the most efficacy with the least amount of adverse events, and it's drastically lower than anything else out there. And here, and I'm going to finish with this, the amount of THC that our patients using on a daily basis, about 1.5 milligrams. If we compare that to the amount of milligrams that patients using Sativex, it's about an order of magnitude and more. And if we compared it to amount of THC that patients consume using ordinary inhalation products, smoking or vaping, you can see how stark and interesting or worrying, deciding on which perspective you're looking at it, is it compared to other things. So when we spoke to our researchers who led this study, we're now publishing our 4th study that also talks about our real world data, is that we are now able to maybe elucidate more the fact that THC has this U-curve dose response. At a very low doses, you get very high efficacy and very low adverse events. And if you cross that U-curve dose effect, you go into higher adverse events and potentially lower efficacy even at these doses. And that's what we've seen with our patients. Patients who use cannabis today are showing even after a year, about 30% it's smoking, vaping oil, and Syqe patients are close to 0 side effects after the titration period, which is very interesting. So sorry for the long spiel, but that's why I tried to condense a lot of information there.
These figures make it absolutely very clear. I think this is what I said when I meant I learned a lot. I have a question on the specifics from Stefano Bernardi. He says the subjects you used, were they comparable in height and weight?
So interestingly, when you talk about inhalation, when you take oral, a lot of the metabolism, the BMI goes into play here with the actual pharmacokinetics. But inhalation, you bypass all of that. So you can normalize that for that. But the differences are much less significant when you deal with inhalation versus oral for the body weight of patients. Now, we, again, from the study process, we did all the normalization for BMI, et cetera, to take a consideration for that. So I invite Stefano to go into the study to see all the specific raw data there.
Yeah. So it is available. It's in the study. You said what was the website again? The website where
if you Google Syqe Eisenberg, I can add it up there, and the data you will find that study specifically. That's the lead investigator.
Yeah, and I also have a question from Ryan. Yes, but I think you already he has 4 questions. But one is can you say something? Can you say something about the difference between inhalation from combustion and from vaporization? Because what do you use, combustion or do you use vaporization, or is that?
So no, combustion would be it's not the same. Combustion is very different aerosol characterization. But again, it's an interesting question because the key thing that we wanted to find out first is what does THC actually do at different doses? That was the first thing to nail down before even adding more cannabinoids, before adding more different types of process. So if it's THC surrounded by smoke or THC surrounded by vapor, I would think that the key clinical outcome would not be so different, other than the fact that you're risking your lungs for noxious gases from smoke, which is always a bad thing. But our product is purely aerosol with zero smoke or any of those. It's a medical device. It has LC certification, all the necessary things to have a physician feel comfortable in prescribing it. I don't think any physician feels comfortable prescribing something that has smoke that goes into your lungs.
Yeah, and there's a question from actually our previous guest in the webinar, Monique van Velsen. You showed a graph with the decrease of side effects. So how do you explain the decrease in side effects? Not the low side effects, but the decrease in it over time.
Right. So what we saw in that graph is that patients onboard on Syqe, and they have a titration period. We slowly up the dose from 250 micrograms. That's the initial dose that patients take. And you saw the graph how stark differently is. And we slowly up the dose until we reach a point where they're balanced with their treatment. So on average, that's about 25 days that happen. So that's where Monique saw that adverse event profile that Syqe had. And then that point where people report dry mouth and things which are pretty much very non-severe in any way. And after the patients are stabilized, they go to the dose which is applicable to them, and then they have almost reported. It's really hard to wrap our hands around. It's about 100 times less THC than any other treatment out there. It really is significant. And you would expect that side effects would be much, much lower.
Yeah, so it's just it's 100 of the dose of the but the spike in side effects in the beginning is because you up it until the moment they experience the side effects.
It's the first experience for patients in THC. They go up in that 25-day period, and again, there's no breakdown of specific side effects, but these side effects, we report everything in our data. We have a full nursing team that follows, so anything from dry mouth to anything that might be reported, we add in there. But right after titration ends, the adverse events are leveling out and stay that and keep that way. And contrary to cannabis, and we assume it's because the doses are that much higher, these adverse events stay for what we're seeing as long as the treatment continues.
Yeah, and one of the adverse events that we talked about last time with Monique was the fact that if people use an inhaler or they smoke the cannabis, then it comes with some social side effects as well. Because if you're in the office, you cannot walk out because it smells and you cannot just go out. Right. Can you say something? How does that compare to the Syqe inhaler?
So we put a lot of emphasis in that design element to make it seamlessly integrate in people's lives, to not have any stigma or any social issues with it. And I think with the design elements, we succeeded in that. It has a very clean, slick, white design that is not suspicious in any way.
Do you have a photo of it? Because I also have a question. Femke says, how does the device look like?
Yeah, so let me just put that up here. So I always joke that the device is not intended to look like a device that Snoop Dogg would use. So it's a device that is intended to be. So this is a device clean and white, and you can see what actually goes on inside. A lot of sophisticated technology in order to make sure that the dose is precise. That's what the time it took us to make this product really precise. A lot of tech had to go inside. There's actually motors inside and sensors, et cetera, to make it work. Now, to your question, so first of all, design, make it as unobtrusive and unsuspicious as possible, but the inhalation itself takes about 2.5 seconds, and there is negligible amount of smell, or because we still use the full plant inside, the Bedrocan plant is in those chips you see here in the device, and there's negligible amount of vapor or smell. And I had this story that one of our patients were actually using it on a plane, in an intercontinental flight. She had the guts to take it out on the plane and take an inhalation. She said it was no problem whatsoever with it. And again, the doses are so small. It's such an instant use. It's less than 10 seconds a day for the entire treatment. And so it disappears in their daily life. And that's what we were designing for.
Does it smell? Do you smell cannabis? No.
The patient might the actual inhalation very, very briefly. But again, it's milligrams of cannabis that actually is being consumed. It's very instant. People who never had actual experience with cannabis probably would not even notice that. And the vicinity after the inhalation is also almost negligible. So it was purposely designed to be that way. So it could be used. It's actually being used in quarantine oncology departments in hospitals. So patients are able to use that in that closed setting without any problem.
Okay.
And it was certified.
And talking about patients, can you share what kind of patient uses the inhaler? What is the indication, and what markets are you available on?
Right. So when we started the company, we said, where can we really make the most impact? And we knew that pain is the population that benefited the most from cannabis. And if we can unlock this dosing challenge, we would make it available to that much more people in pain. So pain is our key population. It's usually about 60 to 80% of the patient populations worldwide that use it. So we were focusing on that. Our clinical data is focusing on that. And we've been commercially active in Israel. That's where we collected that post-marketing data, which I showed you. We'll be publishing that soon, I hope, as well. And we just recently exported our first batch to Australia. So I hope Australia to be coming up online very soon. And Canada, we're looking at the first quarter next year to be available there as well. And so we're having these territories that are planning to be available very soon. And we are setting our sights to the US and through the FDA, of course, to take this product fully online.
Yeah, so you're already
yeah. And Germany also is very strong in our crosshairs, looking how to go again through the main door and make it available to as many patients as possible.
Yeah, thank you. So how do you see the future of inhalation? Because I think from a grower's perspective, from a producer's perspective, the very low dosage you're mentioning is not a very popular. I can imagine it's not a very popular message in the cannabis sector, because you're using 1/100th of the amount to get the same effect. So how do you see the future on that?
So we're always focusing on the patient rather than the industry or the other aspects. Patients are the most important thing for us to try and solve for. So we believe that this hopefully will be one of the first examples of the next generation of inhalation products that is high precision, high resolution delivery system that could provide this nuanced quality of life for patients that they will be specifically looking for that. They would not want to have the highest quality of life possible using cannabis. And given the very nuanced dosing threshold here, these next generation products, I think, are going to be focusing on that precision of delivery. Definitely for naive patients that never used cannabis before, but they've been introduced to cannabis because nothing else helped them, they would much rather use the least amount to get the most effect and have the least impact on their quality of life. And I think these new inhalation generation products should be focusing on that. That's how we see it.
Okay. Well, let's looking at the time, not the time behind you, because I think that clock is that clock is broken.
It's right twice a day. Yeah.
We have some. Do you have some time, because it is 1 o'clock, so we have to wrap it up. But there's still some questions. Do you have some time to go over the?
Yeah. I have a few more minutes for sure.
Sure. Ryan Jess again. He already said it in the beginning. What is your perspective about raw flower in comparison with concentrated formulas? Actually, I would add: are you considering your product a raw flower or a concentrated formula? So
these are questions. We are technically a raw flower product. We load our cartridges with the raw flowers. We do not extract it. We do not add excipients to it. We do not concentrate it. It's the literal raw flower that we receive, and we grind it in a very specific way that we can load it into the device, and then we heat it up and generate an aerosol. And now the question is very valid. What is the difference? And we technically build this device to find out what are the differences, because if you cannot give the same amount of at least THC in every inhalation and expect to see the same blood level every time, it's very hard to compare apples to apples, because I can give someone a concentrate and he would get a super high level of THC, and then I give him raw flowers might be lower. The comparison is not really valid. So we are able to load concentrates in our platform. That's easy for us. The raw flower is the hardest ones. So all these tests that we are maybe looking into doing in the future is really compare same amount of THC, but in concentrate versus flower, which would be best. I'm more of a romantic. I would probably lean more to the raw flowers, but data should be the one that decides that. So that's one answer to Ryan. The inhalation from after combustion, but I think we touched upon that.
Yeah.
And the compound change after introducing temperature to the inhalation. So the actual product of Syqe is the aerosol. That's what's coming out of the aerosol. That's what we measure. That's what we quantify. And that's the only thing we can guarantee that is consistent every time. That's our job. The flowers come with many different compounds inside. So we can change a lot of parameters, and that will change the aerosol. So we can measure for that, but what really counts is the aerosol to be consistent. And then we can do actual studies over it. And cannabinoids versus terpenes, full spectrum entourage effect. Again, I believe that there's a significant role for the entourage effect, but I have not seen conclusive cutting evidence that demonstrate that difference. And we built Syqe for that purpose. So we expect to do clinical trials soon. I always say soon, but it takes more time than I hope. That we would take, again, the same amount of THC in what if people consider indica, and same amount of THC, what people consider indica, and our device can rotate electronically the cartridge and calibrate the dose electronically, and you will get the same THC in their blood, but different entourages. And then we would be very curious to see that where the effects are. And I'm just as curious to see if there is a difference or there isn't a difference. I just would like to see the data behind that first. And
oh, sorry, because I don't know if everyone can see the questions. So especially when we watch, because this webinar will also be on YouTube, so we can watch it back. So we also have a question from Sangeeta. So have you also studied the CBD pharmacokinetics, or is it only THC?
So again, cannabis is such a multifactorial problem. So we started as a company, we invested significant amounts of money, but we had to start somewhere. So if we would add multiple variants to the equation, it would be that much harder for us. And when we decided to focus on pain, we knew that a lot of the evidence showed that pain has a bigger impact with THC rather with CBD. So we have not yet focused on on CBD. We plan on doing it right now. It's one of the projects running in the company. But it'll be very interesting to see those impacts and potentially see a very low dose of CBD to see if its impact is comparable to a high dose of CBD via inhalation, because it has a lot of interesting impacts in tolerance, etc.
Yeah, thank you. And the last question we have in the Q&As is from Paola. How often does a patient dose with Syqe?
So interestingly, the average dosing regimen in Syqe is 3 inhalations per day. 3 inhalations, each inhalation takes about 3 seconds. So we're talking about a treatment session of less than 10 seconds a day.
Wow. Okay. Well,
no prepping or anything. Just turn on the device, take an inhalation, and that's it.
That's it. Barry, thank you very much for your time and the very interesting story. If people want to know more about the product or your studies, where can they find more information?
So they can go to our website, syqe.com, syqe.com, or Google our studies, Syqe Inhaler and European Journal of Pain. That was our most recent study that came out. So you will see that there and read about it. So we're continuously updating, and we're planning on putting out some more studies very soon.
Great. Thank you very much, Perry, for your time, for the great story. And we're definitely going to follow we're very excited about your new research. In the end, you just quickly touched upon sativa and indica. Actually, we know today that a large study is being published in Nature later today. And I can announce we have Dr. Sean Miles and Sophie Watts from Dalhousie University in our next webinar on the 5th of November to talk about that study. I cannot say what the results are because it's still under embargo, but today it's about the genetics and the difference between sativa and indica, or is there no difference? That can also be the outcome. Hope to see the participants next time. Maybe you can join as well, Perry, to see it's about the genetics of sativa and indica. Thank you very much for your time, and love to hear more from you in the future, and hope to see your product on the market soon.
Thank you all for letting us to share the data. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you all participants. The webinar will be posted also on YouTube. So if you want to see certain things back, or you want to show it to your colleagues or your friends, we will send you the link later. And thank you all for joining us. The next webinar will be on the 5th of November, same time, same place. Thank you very much.